Good evening. It is actually quite exciting to see such a diverse audience. Do we have business people in the house? Any business people? Wonderful. Do we have students, lifelong students, part-time, full-time? Yes, we have some. Wonderful. Do we have kidnappers? Kidnappers? No. Okay. What about arsonists? Do we have arsonists? Not Arsenal supporters, arsonists. No arsonists. Okay. Terrorists, at least. Wow. I could keep on going with this list, and I doubt anybody would raise their hand. So we're not so diverse after all. We're all a bunch of good guys. That's why I'd like you to take a journey with me on my train of thought, where we'll eventually get to a point where I'll ask the question, what if you are the bad guy? Now, for us to be on this, to start off from this same station, just to make sure we're on the same train of thought, let's define what a good guy is. In the early 1900s, there lived a young man who advocated for environmental sustainability. He was one of the first in the world to do this. Not only that, but he was also an animal activist. He even wanted to abolish animal cruelty to a point of saying, no more slaughterhouses. Pretty good guy. On top of that, it's safe to assume if that's how he would want to treat animals, how would he value human life? And what he did for the people of his nation, he put policies in place that turned around the economic situation where people were struggling to even buy bread with tons of cash. Inflation had gotten so bad. But he managed to turn that to put policies in place that helped turn that situation around. How many of you would say this person is a hero? No? Nobody? Show of hands? No? Okay, I see a couple of hands. Wonderful. This person goes by the name of Adolf Hitler. Now, I do not have to say more about that. He has already gone from hero to bad guy. He went from, hero to villain, good guy to bad guy. So for the sake of this discussion, let us find out where that went wrong. Because if his narrative stopped where I stopped describing him, we would think this was a great man. But what happened? And like I said, for the sake of this talk, we're going to draw a line in the sand. And the reason why he became a bad guy, we're going to oversimplify it, he crossed this line that says, achieve your goals. Do what you have to. Go for your dreams, even if it's at the expense of others. And that is where we draw the line. Let's take some everyday examples that we could relate to. Law enforcement officers. They're supposed to serve and protect, yes? Wonderful. And they're supposed to stop crime. Now, if we know or hear of an officer who's taking money from robbers, as children we know, cops and robbers, cops good guys, robbers bad guys, right? But if the bad guys are giving the good guy money to look away and not bother doing anything about crime, does that cop remain a good guy? No. What about doctors? Awesome people. Save lives, they help people. And then you find out that one doctor has been taking sexual advantage of unconscious women. Patients, and maybe even sometimes staff. Will he still remain a good doctor? So using that simple example, and that simple line in the sand of the only difference between a good guy and a good guy goes for a cause. So does a bad guy. But one of them is willing to do it at the expense of others. For an example that is really close to home, less than 100 kilometers from here, we have hundreds of families that are not able to sustain themselves because they're way below the poverty line, simply because a few individuals decided to make sure that their families were way above the poverty line. Are they heroes? No. Now, we will get to that question of what if you're the bad guy? Don't worry, I'm not accusing any of you of any of these things. So I will make myself a bit vulnerable and I will tell you about myself. Hi, my name's Harry. I have always had a vivid imagination. And one of the places I realized I had a vivid imagination is from my earliest memory of sitting on an aeroplane. I could always picture what the air hostess was talking about when they were giving the in-flight instructions. Emergency exits that way. I could see myself walking down the aisle and knowing which side of the door I was going to go out. When they talked about bracing yourself for impact, I could see myself doing it. But there was one thing that I did not see myself doing the way the air hostess instructed us. And that was the part that went like this. In the unlikely event of the cabin pressure to drop, masks will fall from the ceiling. Gently pull on the mask, cover your mouth and nose, and breathe normally. Up until that point, no, I'm with together. I'm with you, yes. Wonderful, I can do that, and I'm seeing it. And then there's that extra bit at the end. Make sure you do this before assisting the people next to you. Not me. Because my babysitters were Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman. So naturally, I've been training to be a hero all my life. And this would be how I would see that playing out in my head. In a plane, where the cabin pressure had lightly dropped, the masks came from the ceiling. But one man decided to dramatically unbuckle his belt and, like at the speed of light, helped the lady clutching onto her two babies. And before we know it, he was on the other side of the cabin, helping an old man with Alzheimer's to put his mask on. And like an acrobat, he flips and lands in his seat perfectly. He gently grabs the mask, puts it over his mouth and nose, and breathes normally. That's how I saw that move coming on this flight. Unlikely. But you know, I saw that. I am going to be that person who says, no, not me. I'm going to help you. I'm going to rescue this whole plane and then take care of myself. And I carried this thought for a very long time. Like I said, I have vivid imagination. It has its consequences of delusion sometimes. And I carried it with me for such a long time until recently I heard of a condition called hypoxia. Let me tell you what hypoxia is. There was a scientist on a channel called Smarter Every Day. He explained why you need to put your mask on first. And in this experiment, they flew up into the air, dropped the cabin pressure, and they were all wearing masks and breathing normally. And he was told, okay, great. Here's a simple child's toy. It has 4 holes, and you have 4 corresponding shapes. Simply pick up the shape, name it, and put it in the right hole. And he did, very easily. Circle, round hole. Square, square hole. Triangle, triangular hole. Rectangle, in the rectangular hole. Too easy. And then they said, take off your mask. And he unclipped it. In no time, he was asked to repeat the experiment. And this is what happened. He picked up the triangle, said circle, and tried to put it in the square hole. And he failed this experiment dismally. And it got to the point where they had just given up. He's not going to get this particular thing right. So they asked him, well, first of all, they warned him, and they said to him, we're monitoring your blood oxygen levels, and in a minute, you are going to die if you don't do what you know you should do. Can you do that? And he responded with a humongous smile on his face and said, "I don't want to die," but did nothing about it. He was suffering from hypoxia, the inability to function because of oxygen deficiency. Well, that killed my dream of being a hero, because then I realized, if I have hypoxia, I'm not going to be able to get to that man with Parkinson's and say, "Breathe normally." I'll collapse. I would not be a hero. Why do I bring this up? Why do I bring up hypoxia? Because very often, we say to ourselves, or, this argument that we have, if we do something at the expense of others, we're delving in the realms of being a bad guy. But sometimes we forget that those others include ourselves. So I ask the question again, what if you are the bad guy? Let me share something that's more real life, not in my imagination, but happened. An electrician came over to my house, fixed the problem that we had, and he also went above and beyond by fixing other long-term problems we had that other electricians twice his age could not solve. I was thoroughly impressed with this young man. I'm definitely saving his number. And he started fumbling when I asked him the question, "How much do I owe you?" I don't know, how much do you want to pay me? So I could tell he was inexperienced, still new in the trade, and didn't know how to navigate around this business that he's going to venture into. So I pulled him aside and I said, "Okay, when you're looking at how to charge or what your customers should pay you, take these into consideration. What are your goals with this?" "Oh no, I want to start a business." "Wonderful. So this is what I'm going to do. I will give you a phone number of a friend of mine who can help you get those things registered. Help you with some of it. He's reasonable. And on top of that, also take this and that into." What was I doing? I was facilitating someone's dreams. I was helping, I was at least pointing him in the right direction. And yet, when it came to myself, it was a different story. A long while later, I called this young man because we had a major problem and it needed to be fixed now. And a brilliant electrician as he is, wonderful businessman, he came with his branded truck, he came with his equipment, wearing his overalls and uniform, and professionally handled it. I had to go to work before he finished. At the end of the day, I received an invoice with a letterhead, and even at the bottom, "If it's not paid by this time, this is the interest I'm going to charge." I'm like, yes. I felt like a proud mentor. And yet, I was in a place where I was not facilitating my own dreams. I was not facilitating my own brainchildren, if I can say that. So I started to realize that in my life, I have my other forms of hypoxia. So at whose expense have I been helping others? When I encourage people to study, yes, no, don't give up, and yet I don't do that? At whose expense is that? Am I still being a good guy, at least to myself? When we tell people, yes, eat healthy, exercise, and we do the total opposite, are we still being a good guy? Now we get to the point where I ask the question, what if you are the bad guy? Well, it doesn't just stop at acknowledging or figuring out that, you know what, there might be some places where I could treat myself better, where I can still do good without it being at the expense of my own well-being. The first thing I'm going to say about that, first road to cure, is have a taste of your own medicine. Because a lot of times we are so quick and ready to give good advice, and we see it make the people flourish and succeed, and yet rarely apply it to ourselves. Let's look at some scenarios. When I said, how many kidnappers do we have? Some of us are holding our own dreams at ransom for the sake of other people's dreams. And when I said, how many arsonists do we have? Some of us have burned bridges to relationships that we actually need. People who were daring enough to be honest with us, to hold us accountable, to challenge us. But like an arsonist, we burn that bridge and we lose a valuable relationship. And then I said, how many of us are terrorists? How many of us have exercised self-sabotage? We're on our way. We have finally got our head on straight. Things are working out. Circumstances are not unfavorable anymore, and we're moving in the right direction. But maybe picking a fight with the wrong person, or the over-drinking, or the overindulging in other things, lack of planning, poor prioritizing, or even just start going to work late, start disappointing your clients. And yet you were on the right path. You just had to continue. And we can come up with so many different examples beyond the kidnapping of your dreams, beyond the burning bridges like an arsonist, and beyond being a terrorist and being self-destructive. There's tons of them. So I would like you at this particular point to take a look at yourself and ask, what if I'm the bad guy? Where am I being the bad guy? And when you recognize those places, you are now in a good space. Because if, for example, you realize your temper is your hindrance to building meaningful relationships, you can start working on it. What advice would you give someone with an ill temper? Would you give them good advice yourself, or would you direct them to someone who would? Move from the line of willing to do it at your own, to lose yourself, and get into the side where you can actually say, this is where I need to be. Because I don't have to do this at my own expense. I can do it with somebody. And it's important to ask yourself that question. So this talk doesn't end here. I hope it continues to echo and resonate, and keep finding those places where you're not being a good guy to yourself, and to start fixing those. Thank you.